to our first Bandy Lee Town Hall, where we will be discussing the more dangerous case of Donald Trump, a mental health perspective on what we're seeing, what we can expect, and how we can cope. For those of you who do not know me, I am Dr. Bandy Lee, forensic psychiatrist, violence expert, and editor of The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. I also have a new book out, Profile of a Nation, Trump's Mind, America's Soul, available through my website, bandylee.com. That's BANDYLEE.com. I hope today we'll have a chance to have a conversation and to be able to answer your questions. There are two other co-hosts today, Leonard, who will be taking care of the technical aspects, and Mark, who is the consultant for this event. Please be advised that this session is recorded. The dangers the president is posing on the nation and the globe are multiplying exponentially. Given his predisposition, the more he fails and the more likely he is to lose, we can expect that he is more likely to become vindictive, cruel, and dangerous. At the same time, the origin of his problems is psychological, and therefore we can and must understand and deal with the situation psychologically. So first, we will show a 10-minute video where various members of our coalition and authors have spoken about the psychological dangerousness of this president. Leonard, can we have the first video, please?
Is Trump mentally unfit to be president? That is an awkward question, but it's one that's being asked on every major news network in America.
President Trump's fitness for office is now the top story in the country.
Reports suggest that even Trump's advisors are worried about it.
Everyone around the president questions his intelligence and fitness for office.
100% of the people around him.
Concerns have gotten so bad that Trump agreed to be screened for dementia as part of his last health exam. None of this has to do with Trump's political positions. They have to do with his ability to understand the world around him and make good decisions.
Everybody wants to know, is this president of sound mind?
And if talking about this kind of thing makes you uncomfortable, wait till you see how much it's stressing out actual mental health experts.
In a series of tweets, the president insisted that he is like really smart and a very stable genius.
Last October, a group of 27 mental health experts published this book, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. In it, they warned that Trump's behavior shows him to be dangerously unstable, describing him as a pathological narcissist who is delusional, suffers from paranoid ideation, lacks conscience and empathy, and exhibits a host of destructive and dangerous psychiatric symptoms. Yeah, it's rough. 2 months after its publishing, the book's editor met with 12 US senators to talk about Trump's mental fitness. That editor's name?
It's Dr. Bandy Lee. I am a forensic psychiatrist at Yale School of Medicine and an internationally recognized expert on violence.
Since the book came out, Dr. Lee has become kind of the face of mental health experts warning about Trump.
We express our consensus view that Mr. Trump is a danger to national and international security. Some of the psychological signs are impulsivity, recklessness, paranoid reactions, having a loose grip on reality, lacking empathy, having rage reactions. All of these are highly associated with violence.
This week's chaos in the Trump administration is by now unsurprising and was in effect predicted by the new book, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, 27 psychiatrists and mental health experts assess a president, edited by Bandy Lee, MD, a psychiatrist. The book includes and validates some of the general news media's speculation about Donald Trump's mental capacity.
He is emotionally driven, not obviously intellectually driven. You don't even want to use that word with regard to Trump. And I absolutely believe that any decision he makes is going to be primarily influenced by the intensity of the emotion he happens to be feeling at that moment.
Which includes personal feeling about the person he's dealing with, whether he likes that person or not.
You know, it isn't about liking the person, because Donald Trump doesn't like people. What he does is he sees them as useful or not useful, and he sees them as mirroring him and supporting him, or opposing him and diminishing him.
I want to go to just one entry in the book. This is Henry Friedman, Associate Professor of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, on the role of Donald Trump's cabinet relevant to this week's Tillerson story. He says, a paranoid, hypersensitive, grandiose, ill-informed leader such as Donald Trump, who has surrounded himself with a cabinet and set of advisors who either are unable to bring him out of his paranoid suspicions and insistencies, or worse, identify with his positions, represents a multi-dimensional threat to our country and the world. And Dr. Lee, when a psychiatrist sees this that way, that's the definition of the duty to warn.
Exactly. The Goldwater rule itself, which is the ethical guideline not to diagnose a public figure in the open, falls under the ethical principle that we participate in activities that promote public health and public mental health. And so when silence contributes to harm to the public health, then we do have a duty to speak out, and the duty to warn and the duty to protect.
As far back as July 16, I was saying, made me think that he could, in an impulsive, angry moment, punch in the nuclear codes with nobody between him and our destruction.
Dr. Bandy Lee and Tony Schwartz, thank you very much for joining us. The book is The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, and this is an historic work in the history of American psychiatry.
Sorry about that. Forgot to unmute myself. So thank you. That was in early 2017, after all that was following a conference that we held early in 2017 on the mental health professionals' duty to educate the public if there were psychological dangers, as we saw. Afterward, we met with over 50 Congress members who encouraged us to continue educating the public so that the people could be brought on board and a political intervention would be possible. When nothing happened and we were blocked from all the media, we decided to hold another conference. This happened in March 2019, when an unprecedented event brought together 13 different experts, top experts from all around the country at the National Press Club. They were from psychiatry, the law, history, political science, economics, journalism, nuclear science, and climate science, all together in one space to discuss how the president was unfit from each of their perspectives. And so we have prepared a short highlights video of that event. Could you turn on the next video, please? Good afternoon. Welcome to our conference event by the title, The Dangerous State of the World and the Need for Fit Leadership.
I am a scared American citizen with considerable experience internationally and almost daily experience of the Trump reality around the world. This is a very dangerous world, and President Trump is making it a lot more dangerous.
It is for that reason that we have the 25th Amendment of the Constitution that was adopted in the 1960s to respond to the grave threat to our country if a psychologically imbalanced individual who was incapable of serving as President of the United States were to be in the White House and in control of nuclear weapons.
Managing his moods comes to take up valuable time and space in the media. And the bad judgment caused by one of his worst character flaws, not wanting to take any criticism, can end up in ruinous situations and catastrophe for the nation. Trump is not fit to serve as leader and commander-in-chief of American democracy. But he is fit, entirely, eminently fit to serve as the leader of an authoritarian state.
Acts of genocide, ethnic cleansing, and terrorism have been preceded by periods in which political and social movements employed just this rhetoric. One way to control someone is through force. A much better way to control someone, though, is by changing their obligations to make them what you want. If you make someone think that what they ought to do is what you want them to do, that's much better than forcing them.
There's a deafening silence in the public about these questions at this depth. So what happens when citizen action begins, community discussions, churches, temples, that kind of university discussion? It is really important to get beyond the quiet, the deafening quiet that in fact is the march quietly towards whatever Donald Trump and Mr. Bolton want to do to us.
That it is a fallacy of humanity to consider the use of nuclear weapons. Now we fast forward to our current commander-in-chief, a man who not only got us out of the INF Treaty, turned his back on the Iran nuclear agreement, which again prevented the proliferation of nuclear weapons. But he's also the one who fumbled the North Korean nuclear deal.
The clean energy technology solutions are here, I can assure you, as a former acting assistant secretary of energy for energy efficiency and renewable energy. But the grand oil party keeps blocking and mocking what needs to be done. So the nation is in the most dangerous state because President Trump and the Trumpublican Party, the only climate science denying party in the world, reject truth, evidence, and science.
In times of crisis, individuals regress to a state of delegated omnipotence and demand a leader who will rescue them and take care of them. And that, I would assert, is what is happening in contemporary society. It's a force for human destructiveness when the narcissistically wounded leader rages at the world for depriving him of mirroring and enlists his followers in attacking it.
I often analog between Donald Trump and the worst prison guard in my Stanford prison experiment. That student, who by chance was assigned to play a prison guard, soon internalized that role in the extreme. He reported later that he felt as if he were a puppeteer and the prisoners, who were other students, were his puppets, so that he could make them do anything by pulling their strings. This total dehumanization of others reflects a dictatorial mindset that characterizes much of Trump's treatment of everyone.
If you sat down on a bus next to Donald Trump and started a conversation with him, had no idea who he was, within an hour you would be saying to yourself, how did I get next to this crazy person? Who is this blowhard nutcase? The fact is that tens of millions of Americans, many of them well-educated Americans, believe that Donald Trump is a demagogue. Not a demagogue, but a demagogue. That should disturb us deeply.
I mean, we all laugh and we say, oh, Donald Trump's like your mad old racist uncle at Thanksgiving dinner. We laugh, we make that analogy. It's not funny, though, because your mad old racist uncle at Thanksgiving dinner isn't the commander-in-chief of the world's most powerful military, doesn't have access to the nuclear codes, isn't in control of the FBI, the NSA, the CIA, the Secret Service, isn't the de facto leader of one of this country's two major political parties.
The nuclear age obviously dramatically changes the stakes of what it means to allow someone who is mentally imbalanced to reach the highest levels of government. At least I wanted to give you some background on the constitutional architecture dealing with this problem and say that there are some people in Congress who are working on this problem, and we will be pushing legislation in this Congress.
I would open the floor only for solutions.
In the history of propaganda, it's a unique situation because the Fox News, which is like his allied media, state media practically, doesn't just parrot the leader as in the past. It's a feedback loop where Trump parrots them.
And I think one of the solutions, or one of the things to do, is precisely the sort of thing that's starting here. And that is to say, the women's movement, the environmental movement, the civil rights movement recognized, and the anti-nuclear movement at one point, the need actually to begin building movements external to just normal politics.
Donald Trump is a symptom of a larger problem, and that problem is the electorate of the United States that put him in office.
It's going to take the point where the people of this country, certainly the people who care about the future of this country, are going to have to step up and say, this is absurd, this is obscene, and it has to change.
Our ethical guidelines state that we have a primary responsibility to patients and to society.
I had the honor of serving on the Presidential Commission on the 25th Amendment, and I totally agree with Dr. Lee.
I think the idea is to avoid absolute disaster right now. And this does not seem to be taken very seriously in our political processes.
Okay, that was now in March 2019 when the second edition of our book came out with 10 more mental health experts, mounting to 37 mental health experts assessing a president from a social, cultural, and geopolitical perspective. Now that was again in March 2019. A month later, the special counsel Robert Mueller's report came out, and we were actually able to do a mental capacity evaluation that explains why a president would be unfit from all these perspectives. That is when you are lacking mental capacity, that means you do not have the building blocks to be able to do to be fit in any of these domains. What is a mental capacity evaluation? It tests the person's ability to make rational, sound decisions based on considering consequences. And they must be grounded in reality, be able to take in advice as well as facts, and not be swayed by impulsivity or conspiracy theories or other fixed false beliefs. We did this by forming an independent panel of top mental health experts from around the country. And this is a functional exam, not a diagnostic exam. It does not require personal evaluation. It requires reports by close associates and coworkers who have directly interacted with the president, and we had that in abundance at the highest quality under sworn testimony. That is how we were able to do a rigorous, standardized mental capacity evaluation on the president, and he failed every criterion. Now, alarmed at this, we sent our results to all members of Congress, including our recommendations that he be removed from access to nuclear weapons and war-making powers, primarily, although many other dangers would be at play when someone lacks mental capacity in such a high office. When we began our warnings, we did not know that there would be a pandemic. But once we learned of a pandemic, we knew from this mental capacity evaluation how he would handle it. In fact, we sent out warnings again, stating that the death toll of the pandemic will not depend on the characteristics of the virus, but will depend on what we do given his mental state. That essentially his mental state will determine how devastating this pandemic will become. So now here we are facing election season with mounting crises, with a worsening deadly pandemic, devastating economic prospects, and a growing geopolitical instability. So that is why we wanted to open this discussion, to be able to figure out what we can expect, interpret what we are seeing, and also learn what we can do under these situations to help us to preserve our public safety and health and our democracy. And so we can now move on to the question and answer session. If you have a question, you can go to the lower bar on your screen where it says participants. If you click on that, you will see the option to raise your hand. And once you raise your hand, Leonard will be calling your name and then unmuting. Then you can unmute yourself and ask your question. Leonard?
Let's begin. There's someone who signed in with the name Resistor Girl. You're next to ask a question. Please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hi, thank you for having this. So my question is, what would happen if he lost this election? Do you believe he will contest it or put us into serious danger? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your question. Yes, there are many things that we can expect, and it ranges anywhere from small dangers to the greatest possible. I don't think we can expect an uneventful transition, and many people have commented on that, but certainly understanding his psychological structure, that would be very unlikely. I list the number of possibilities, I believe 7 different kinds, in my profile of a nation. And first on the list is actually extreme response, such as an international war, inciting civil war, or even nuclear war are not off the table. Now, what will become possible and what eventually results usually depends on circumstance and situation a great deal. And there are some things we can do. And it's outlined in greater detail in my book, but as questions come up, I can go in greater detail. Thanks for keeping your question short, by the way, and I've been instructed to keep my answers short to get as many questions as possible, so I'll try to spread it out. Next question, please.
Mark, you're next to ask a question to Dr. Lee. Please unmute your microphone and go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much. Dr. Lee, my question is your thoughts about sort of breaking the link with followers. Given all that you've described, we know that there's huge numbers of followers who probably stand to gain in terms of their own perception of benefit, whether it's greed or hatred or things that they adhere to. And I know from the debates you had some thoughts about how a professional might intervene, but also if you could have something for the rest of us too, how we might respond to people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, so that's a reason why I put out the profile recently as a public service in order to make a psychological link between what we're seeing in the president, his followers, and conditions of the nation. These are all in an ecology, and everything influences everything else. So the followers are certainly important. Many people ask me, how do we persuade his followers from leaving him? My answer usually is that you don't. It's not a matter of persuasion. Because we have someone who is so severely mentally impaired in an office of the presidency, his influence is also beyond the realm of rationality or logic. In fact, mental symptoms, severe symptoms, can spread to the population. So much so that those who receive his symptoms almost look like they have the exact condition that the primary person has. This is called shared psychosis or induced delusional disorder. It is seen usually in 2 or 3 or the family or a gang at a time, but now we're seeing it at national level. So it's much like infectious disease. Mental symptoms transmit also, not by physical exposure, but by emotional bonds and exposure. So reducing the exposure would be an immediate means of having his followers detract. We've seen this happen in the very beginning of the pandemic, when for a while the president was not allowed to hold rallies. And when his poll numbers dropped, many people thought it was the mishandling of the pandemic. But we who were monitoring his psychological state could see that it directly correlated with the lack of exposure. Okay, next question, please.
Great. The next question is going to be from Megan O'Brien. If you can unmute your microphone, please go ahead.
Hi, Dr. Lee. Thank you for this event. My question is, if you can talk a little bit more about how and why you guys have been pushed out of the media and any possible solutions.
Yes, that's a long story in itself. I believe this happened because we were so successful. In the beginning, shortly after publication of the book, within months, we were able to raise the issue of the president's mental health to the #1 topic of national conversation. This was in January 2000, and many people remember this event as being like a light switch. Things suddenly shut off. What happened on the inside was the American Psychiatric Association stepped in, recruited the New York Times, and basically put out press releases stating that we were unethical, we were practicing armchair psychiatry for self-aggrandizing reasons, and using psychiatry as a political tool. This was all through public campaigns because they had no ethical or jurisdiction over any of us. Most of us are not members of the APA. The APA is the only organization that has this rule that there was a rule saying that you should not diagnose a public figure without examining them and getting their consent. Well, they changed it with the Trump presidency 2 months after inauguration to include not just diagnosis, but any comment of any objective observable behavior, speech, or affect. And when that didn't stop us, they went on a media campaign. They recruited the New York Times, and once they did, many other media fell in line, and within weeks, we were off the major media and have been off ever since. It's very tragic, I agree. Next question, please.
Great. The next question is the Zoom user that's going by the name of Storm. You're next for Dr. Lee. Please unmute your microphone and go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Lee, for continuing to provide us the important information, and we'll do what we can to help amplify your voice on social media. My question also relates to the followers of Dr. Donald Trump, and I was wondering, do you see, let's say that Donald Trump is finally completely removed from the scene, are they going to be like cult members who were successfully deprogrammed and become contrite and remorseful, or are they going to seek out some other kind of demagogue to follow?
Yes, thank you for your question. Yes, there are many factors involved. What I spoke of earlier, the contagion of mental symptoms, the good part of that is that once you remove the exposure, the symptoms dissipate. In fact, those who were of normal mental health would return to their baseline state. This is actually a very dramatic phenomenon that we see with shared psychosis or induced delusional disorder, where a very mentally ill person who goes untreated and stays in a family with healthy family members usually don't get better by the healthy members, but the healthy family members take on their symptoms. But the solution then is to remove the person. Once you hospitalize them, then just as dramatically those symptoms disappear. Now that's just the contagion part. Of course, there's cultic programming through propaganda and misinformation systems. That's another layer to it. But the true source is socioeconomic conditions that led large portions of the population to become vulnerable in the first place. And those are some things that we need to fix.
Great. The next question will be from Johanna Fernandez. You're next. Please unmute your microphone. Please unmute your microphone.
Hi there. Thank you so very much for taking my question. And thank you, Dr. Lee. My question is more about the folks who are in power, who do see that there is a problem. What is it that keeps those who see danger from acting accordingly?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Good to see you. Thank you for your question. Yes, of course, we see around the president many enablers and those actually who are benefiting from having a mentally impaired president. Extreme policies that would have no chance of passing with a healthier president are much easier to advance under someone who is mentally weak. So, so we see those special nefarious interests also find opportunity in this situation. I often say that a large amount of the corruption and malfunctioning of institutions can actually be resolved by addressing some of the fundamental structural problems, which are the socioeconomic conditions that I spoke of. It is what I call structural violence. I wrote a textbook on violence that heavily focuses on structural violence, the inequalities in society, be it economic, racial, sexual. These inequalities add to structural violence that results in a greater number of deaths and harm than any level of wars, collective violence, homicides, suicides, believe it or not. And so a lot of corruption and weak institutions result from this structural violence. Next question, please.
Great. The next question will come from Charles Crum. Please unmute your microphone and go ahead.
Hi. So I have an important question. Are you aware that the policies and beliefs that you advocate for will systematically discriminate against not just mentally ill people and not just disabled people, but also other marginalized people as well, considering Black and trans people are more likely to be diagnosed with mental illnesses? You've gone as far as to support literacy tests like Jim Crow laws. Why? I mean, I don't understand.
Okay. So you're asking about would I stigmatize those who are mentally ill? Actually, if you look at the literature, it's not speaking about mental impairment or illness that stigmatizes those who have mental illness, but rather a lack of information. So currently we are in fact suffering from a lack of awareness and a lack of illness is, how it affects people, how wide-ranging and diverse it is. For the most part, it causes suffering to the person who is afflicted, not to others around them. Only a small proportion afflicts others around them. But we can see from this presidency alone just how much suffering it causes. And so we can now begin to have compassion for those who suffer within. They don't bother anybody, but this is the level of suffering that they undergo quietly, silently by themselves. And so my recommendation for that is to open discussion about mental illness, mental disorder. We are grossly undereducated in this area. And we are suffering the side effects, in fact, of that ignorance. So my solution to that would be discussion, more discussion, dispelling myths and stigma, and that this is something real, it exists, and it's something that needs to be addressed even to relieve suffering.
Right. The next question will be from Earl Cohen. If you can unmute your microphone and go ahead.
Yes. Dr. Lee, given Trump's psychological makeup, could you see a possibility with him seeking a pardon by actually resigning after the election rather than seeing it through and having to fight federal charges for a number of years? Does that makeup, would that makeup allow him to really take that road?
Yes, thank you for that question. In fact, I have greatly advocated for trying to convince him to resign at any point. In fact, he is very suggestible. Many people see his defenses and therefore believe that he is someone who would never let go of the presidency, but I have repeatedly said he is probably someone who is the easiest to persuade to resign because of his impulsivity, his detachment from reality, and you almost do not need conditions to be able to have to convince him to this end. We see this from the way that he has done of brutal dictators such as Vladimir Putin or Kim Jong-un or Recep Erdogan. They almost did not require having great, they almost didn't have to offer him anything in return. And so what's important is to understand his psychology. If we understood his psychology, we would find lots of solutions. In fact, he is not so exceptional in terms of what his psychological structure is. It's actually quite common. I myself have seen at least 1,000 individuals and treated 1,000 individuals with his characteristics. Next question.
Yes, great. The next question will be from Vanessa Boba. If you can unmute your microphone and please go ahead. Vanessa, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me, Dr. Lee?
Yes, hello.
Yes, you mentioned on Twitter that you've been called in to give input on 25th Amendment legislation, and I'm wondering if there's anything that you are able to discuss about your input that you're giving and maybe what consequences that may have.
Yes, just to note that I was just asked to give preliminary input for the thought process that will go into the eventual legislation. It's been introduced by Nancy Pelosi and Jane Raskin about a week ago, and so the rest I cannot really share, but I just wanted the public to know that we are giving some input. As for the legislation itself, we have made recommendations since early on because there is no mechanism for testing, screening, or offering data to allow for the 25th Amendment or any other political choice to proceed. That's of course not our choice, but it is our duty to give input that would be important. And so I have also been on a number of panels with the drafter of the 25th Amendment, and we have shared this view that it should be based on data and it should be based on the actual needs of the situation, not political feasibility. Now, related to that, we issued a prescription for survival back in March of this year in response to the pandemic. But those are some of the responses that Congress members or the people can lean on their Congress members to take these processes, not not because they are realizable, but because they would be part of the psychological limit setting and shaping that would allow for the elections to go smoothly. So anyone who is interested in taking a look at the options we offer can go to prescriptionforsurvival.org, where we have our prescription. We state that we do not care as health professionals how it is done. That is not our place to say, but we do say as health professionals that it must be done. The president or that his influence must be removed. And those are what we outline in the prescription. Thank you. Next question.
The next question will be from Larry Borstein. If you can unmute your microphone and please go ahead. Larry, please go ahead.
Sorry about difficulty unmuting. Dr. Lee, how significant do you think President Trump's individual makeup has been in the ongoing failure of the United States' response to the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that question. I think that has absolutely everything to do with his psychological makeup. In fact, in the beginning of the pandemic, I gave an interview where I stated that we already have the information to know that having him as president would be worse than having no leader at all. That's about the same time when I said that the death toll would be reflective of not the virus itself, but his mental state. And we now have a blow-by-blow account of the things that we said, things my colleagues and I have said would happen and what eventually did happen. You can find that in the article, The Trump Mental Health Pandemic. It's available on the front page of my website, bandylee.com.
Great. The next question is from Donald. You're next. Please unmute your microphone and go ahead.
Hi, Dr. Lee. Thank you for your work. I know at the beginning you predicted that President Trump would just get worse, and lately it definitely seems that way. Some people say he's the same as he's always been, but to me he seems like he's losing control. So I'm wondering your opinion about that.
Yes, thank you. So when we were putting out the book, the main message was that the president was more dangerous than the public suspected, that he would grow more dangerous with time, and that eventually, without intervention, he would become uncontrollable. Now, why did we say that? We said that because, first of all, because the lay public without training and without the clinical experience of people who are severely impaired would not be able to recognize how severely impaired he is. They would generally normalize him and underestimate the dangers because there's a wide variation in human normalcy. And so to detect mental pathology, you need to have experience with it. Once you do have experience, it's very stereotypical and rigid, and you can recognize it. So that's why we said it would be more dangerous than anyone would expect. And it would grow more dangerous because we, instead of the right management of such severe mental impairment, which is to contain the person, to set limits on the person, we actually gave him what he wanted, basically what his mental pathology drives him to seek, which is power. And giving power to an individual of this impairment actually worsens them and causes their delusions of grandeur, of impunity and omnipotence to grow over time and grow at a more rapid pace than the growth of their own power, such that eventually they're never satisfied. It never solves the fundamental problem because it's never addressed. And eventually we would meet with great danger, which is what we're seeing. So in a sense, his fundamental psychological structure has not changed, but the situation has made everything much worse and made him much more dangerous. Next question, please.
Great. The next question will be from Susan Jones. You're next with Dr. Lee. Please unmute your microphone and go ahead.
Dr. Lee, thank you for taking my question. How do you explain the people around him who've had brilliant careers and been very successful, but yet as time goes on, he's just taken a hammer to everything that they worked for and represented in their lives, but they say nothing? How do you explain, what is your explanation for that? Thank you.
Thank you. So one aspect of having a dangerous personality in power is that they will very aggressively advance their agenda and bully other people, make it very difficult to essentially to speak the truth and to carry out their professional duties. He requires absolute loyalty to him, and the way they prove their loyalty is by committing crimes and being willing to subvert the law, to break the rules, or to risk their lives, as we see when he packs his followers in crowded indoor rallies without any masks or social distancing. He's essentially requiring them to show their devotion by risking their lives. And so when you are under this level of pressure, and especially when someone is mentally impaired, the pressure is extreme because it's emotionally driven, then you are quickly encountered with a choice, whether to follow along and kind of follow a survival instinct. That's why a lot of people become quiet or submissive or compliant, or and others are opportunists, but still others become intimidated and they back down and they give him more room than they would anyone else. That's how a white supremacist took so long to be called racist, and someone who pathologically lies was not even people were not even able to call him a liar for very long. So, so the correct response is actually to be quite aggressive and to set severe limits and contain the person. Then you will quickly realize that this is only a facade and that there's really no substance underneath. There's no strength underneath. It's merely superficial threats. But people not having access to this psychological information and not being familiar with this condition responded in an instinctive way to try to preserve themselves, their jobs or livelihoods. And by enabling him for so long, they've come to take on his symptoms. Many people essentially have taken on his false beliefs and his attitude, his worldview, as part of the mental contagion that I spoke about, mental symptom contagion. Next question, please.
The next question will be from Jeff Smith. If you can unmute your microphone, and then please go ahead.
Hi, Dr. Lee. Yes, I'm just, one thing that Donald Trump has revealed to me is just how crucial educating communities and societies with regards to the matter of public health. And we also know that the bell curve of empathy can shift depending on collectively how we feel. I'm just keen to sort of find out from you how we as local people within the community can do somewhat a similar thing to what you're doing with regards to campaigning generally. So how could we, would there be ways of us contacting civil leaders, even with the weeks leading up to the election, in order to try to engender some form of education that shifts people's views. And maybe those people who are more ambivalent might think of things differently and might reconsider Trump in respect to this.
Yes, exactly. I think that's a very important perspective to consider, that what we need is the momentum. Now that lawmakers have not succeeded in containing him, those who have any authority or institutions have failed to set limits on him. Now it has fallen on the people. And so definitely during election season, voting is very important, but what we do outside of voting is equally important when it comes to psychological containment. And that can also be infectious. It's not as quickly infectious as mental symptoms, but as you know, courage and the willingness to speak the truth and to confront what is happening can also be infectious, in that people can gain courage from other people speaking the truth. And this is actually a very powerful resource. We saw recently that even John Kelly, who was continuing to keep his silence, has come forth and called the president the most defective human being, is that right? The worst, the most dishonest human being he has encountered. So these people in power who were aligning with the president earlier are now coming forth, I believe, because of the power of the people. The people are powerful when the people come forth. The one time, in fact, when the president said that if he loses the election, he loses, maybe he'll go do something else. That's when that historic crowds came out in the midst of a pandemic in the Black Lives Matter movement. So these are things that can set limits on the president and contain him. We can do it through other means, as I said, telling the truth, stating what we see. And you can also support us as mental health professionals. We can also speak for the people in using our expertise and explaining what we see, explaining the usual medical standard of management of such conditions, which has not been followed any manner of step of the way. Even recently, as he had a change of mental status and was being discharged, as he was a danger to the public and himself. As well as probably not having mental capacity to sign out against medical advice, if that's what he was doing. But if you demand to hear from mental health experts, then we can speak more. And our website can be reached through dangerouscase.org.
Great. Monique, you're next with your question. Please unmute your mic and go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you, Dr. Lee, for all of your very important work. I'm interested in the answer to a question that someone called Vicky Wernicke has asked in the chat, which is, how has Trump's recent COVID diagnosis and treatment affected his mental health?
Yes, how it has affected him in detail is only something we can figure out with a close examination. But we know from the April 2019 evaluation that he simply lacked mental capacity at baseline. He was mentally unfit. Therefore, a change of mental status for the worse is likely to have made him more unfit, not better. Now, how can we know that COVID-19 affects the brain? It can cause delirium, brain fog, cognitive deficits for months afterward. He was also receiving very strong medication. Dexamethasone can cause delirium, euphoria, and even frank psychosis. Regeneron, which is a new medication, we do not know what effects it has, but we know it's a strong medication that is likely to have severe effects. And so all this combined, it is actually medically inconceivable that the White House doctor let him go without a psychiatric exam. In fact, there are many reasons for him to have gotten a psychiatric exam. The fact that he was being discharged so much sooner than any medical protocol would call for. So was he signing out AMA, against medical advice? In that case, you have to ensure that the person is mentally capable. Also, just from, as I said, a close examination would be required to figure out what is affecting his mental status, and that alone would require a psychiatric consult. Also, we see someone who was behaviorally alone, medically, psychiatrically committable. That is, meeting the criteria of, for locked psychiatric care in a locked facility. And in other words, someone who is a danger to self, a danger to others, and apparently unable to care for himself. So, so such a person was not given a psychiatric screening, but let go, was all violating all medical standards of care. And finally, since he is the president, it seems matter of fact that one would perform a mental capacity, a fitness exam before letting him resume his duties. That was not done. A White House physician is not eligible to do this exam because he's White House employed and a subordinate to a commander, to the commander-in-chief. So it has to be done by independent mental health experts. That was not done. So it's certainly a disservice to the people.
Great. And then just, Dr. Lee, give you a quick check. There's about 4 or 5 people who still have their hands up. And then there's 1 or 2 questions that have come through the chat. So I'll let you determine exactly when you want to kind of wrap things up. But we probably should say at this point, no additional questions should be asked at this juncture.
Thank you, Leonard. Why don't we hear the 4 questions in succession, and I will try to answer them as much as I can.
Great. Okay, Jamie, you're next. Please unmute your microphone and go ahead.
Hi, Dr. Lee. I kind of have a comment question. I grew up in the Appalachian South, and I kind of feel guilty that I grew up in a small town where everybody's father either worked for the Tennessee Valley Authority or the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. So a lot of us, like my dad worked at Warnell, were of the intellectual families, and then we had a bunch of poor kids who are either coal miners or tobacco farmers. And I think in retrospect, it was people like us who kind of caused this separation of intellectuals against country people. And I'm wondering if those kids today are now these Trump supporters. And, you know, I've received animosity to this day from people who are apparent Trump supporters because I use bigger words and things like that. So I don't know what if that has anything to do with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Great. For the next question, Frank Boban.
Thank you. Dr. Lee, how do we move forward in a post-Trump presidency? Should Trump be pardoned like Nixon? Do we risk further escalation of violence if he's held accountable? How do we heal after Trump leaves office?
Okay, thank you. Next question.
Laura, if you can go ahead with your question.
Hi, Dr. Lee. Much for all of your work. I wanted to ask, in the case that Trump loses the election and he does react in an extreme way, what can we do to protect ourselves, or is there anything we can do to protect ourselves?
Okay, thank you. Next question, please.
And then Stacy, if you can go ahead with your question.
Hi, thanks, Bandy, for everything. I'm curious about your professional profile or psychological profile of specifically Barr and Pompeo.
Okay. Okay, so shall I try to answer these 4 questions? What do we do with those who have been deprived of education and have later become Trump supporters. Well, the solution to that is not to cause such great deprivation, because when we are deprived of something, in order to protect ourselves, it is natural to develop defenses, psychological defenses, such as to state that there are benefits to not getting education, for example, and trusting our own perspectives. But what to do at that point is not to make use of that for political manipulation and power. So I don't so much see that as the fault of the Appalachian community, but rather the fault of our leaders who have used psychological techniques actually to gain power and not to do their jobs, to redistribute education, healthcare, and economic opportunities. These would help alleviate a lot of the anti-intellectualism or the psychological defenses that occur when one is deprived. Now, second, what do we do to hold the president accountable? Is it wise to prosecute him, hold him criminally responsible? I would say absolutely. In fact, we have not done that enough. That is why we have the psychologists. Individuals of his psychological structure do not have internal constraints. The constraints have to come from the outside. And that is why rather than having one article of, or two articles of impeachment, we actually petitioned Congress. More than 800 mental health professionals had petitioned Congress during the impeachment hearings to say that they needed to consult with us. They needed to address the psychological aspects, or else all their efforts would fail. And one of the proposals we would have had was to increase the articles. In other words, we needed to have an encyclopedia of articles in order to contain his behavior, even if it did not go through the Senate. There were, we could make use of the process to psychologically contain him, which was our urgency, because we believe that all the subsequent problems emanate from the psychological problems. And that has not happened yet, which is why we see a worsening of all the dangers in criminality and impunity. So the sooner we can do this and the more aggressively we can do it, as I said before, his defenses are only at the surface. He's essentially pretty submissive, obsequious, and dependent on others, and therefore would comply if we did this correctly. Now, how do we protect ourselves in the face of great danger? Now, at the same time, this surface defensiveness of violence is also very dangerous. It is the most dangerous. It's not the strong, courageous, and stable individuals who are violent. It is those who are unstable and fighting their own feelings of inadequacy and trying to project power when they feel extremely powerless. And so, well, we are under extreme danger, and we, if we see that anything is possible right now, as I said before, a civil war, international war, or even nuclear war would be something that he would easily go through, and has said in the past that he doesn't know why nuclear weapons are there if they're not to be used, that he's expressed an attraction to nuclear weapons, and he's changed policies to allow for nuclear weapons to be more easily used. So even up to our ultimate annihilation cannot be ruled off the table. Now, what to do in this situation? That is why we need to be psychologically strong. In fact, there's a saying that I often give to medical students or to lawyers going into defending their client. In an emergency, first, check your own pulse. In other words, physician, lawyer, heal thyself first. Take care of yourself. make sure you are grounded, well grounded, and you spend time away from the anxiety provoking reality, that you give yourself an hour a day, an afternoon a week, a getaway once in a while. Do what you love and build your love for life and love for the world, for humanity, and you will come up with solutions. When you're in a state of good health, you can also come up with creative solutions. And the most effective movements in history have been nonviolent movements from the people against the greatest, most violent regimes. And so the people can do this. So that's my answer for now. Regarding my profile, I'll just explain what the profile is. It's when we came out with the first book, which was an instant New York Times bestseller and an unprecedented bestseller of its kind, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. 27 and then 37 psychiatrists and mental health experts assess a president. That was warning the public about what could happen and what was likely to happen before this presidency, just as this presidency was starting. Now we're kind of at the end. And so I tried to put together a comprehensive psychological profile of the president, not in isolation, because now, having been in power for a while, he has affected a great deal of his ecology, meaning his followers and the nation. And so it's trying to give people a perspective, because if we have in-depth understanding, we can deal with the situation. We come up with greater solutions. In fact, the lack of solution comes from a lack of knowledge and lack of awareness of what is happening. And also, of course, denial and all kinds of other defenses are maladaptive. But gaining knowledge and confronting the problem and drawing on our own resources of health, flexibility, creativity, and life-affirming decisions and choices can help the situation, can help us out of any situation. And that's why I wanted to put some of that into a volume and get it out quickly during this time of the election and greater pressures. But first of all, at this time, it's important that we get out the vote and everyone participate in voting. That's our civic participation. And on the side, we can strengthen our civic consciousness and overall strength through taking care of ourselves and each other. So I guess we will wrap up with that for now. Again, the Profile of a Nation and other books. You can also get a collection of our letters, petitions, and conference transcripts in the Documents book by the World Mental Health Coalition through my website at bandylee.com. Also, you can see in there our recent activities and other articles and interviews. So please visit us, and thank you again for participating. We will be sure to make use of your generous contributions to get our word out more effectively and for our next town hall. So hope to see you then.